gas lamp-lit streets and dark, foggy alleys didn't offer the residents of Whitechapel an inspiring backdrop in which to lead their lives. The area was steeped in poverty and all manner of crime and disease. Growing up in this part of London offered a challenge in itself. Many children were seen as a strain on their parents' resources, and it is believed that 2 in every 10 children died before reaching the age of 5. Victorian London was not a happy place to be. The facts speak for themselves. Prostitution was rife, poverty and crime were prevalent, and the 19th century housing was barely habitable. Finding work in 1888 was extremely difficult for the residents of Whitechapel, feeding into the cycle of destitution and depravity. Whitechapel offered a breeding ground for crime and poor behavioral habits, including murder, prostitution, and violence. And vicious circles like these were rarely broken in such poor districts. The streets were unimaginably dirty, fresh food was hard to come by, and pollution and the smell of sewage hung in the air. Life was much harder for women. The lack of proper work and money led many women and girls into prostitution, a service in high demand by those wishing to escape the grim realities. The women, commonly referred to as unfortunates, owned only what they wore and carried in their pockets. Their deeds would pay for their bed for the night. However, a lack of contraception meant that unorthodox abortions were performed in dirty facilities, including the back streets. This, of course, fed into the cycle of disease, and many women would die of infection from these ill-performed surgeries or from ingesting chemicals or poison. While the streets were lined with the starving, penniless inhabitants of the drab and dark capital, the inside of the houses throughout the borough were no less uninviting and more reminiscent of slums. Many were makeshift brothels, offering a bed and a room to those who wishing just a short-term escape. However, this was a dangerous trade, as diseases were passed from person to person very quickly and doctors did not come cheap. Housing was extremely overcrowded, with entire families or groups of strangers crammed into a single room for cooking, eating, and sleeping. They would share beds or sleep on the floor, with rags covering broken windows and often flea or insect-infested environments. These damp and cold conditions offered an ideal climate for further disease and sickness to develop. Surviving in the late 19th century often came through casual or sweated labor, like tailoring, bootmaking, or making matchboxes. These professions came with very little job security, and the work premises would more than likely be small, cramped, dusty rooms with little to no natural light. Workhouses were another alternative, set up to offer food and shelter to the poorest of the community in return for hard, grueling labor in even the worst conditions. These horrible working and living conditions resulted in large portions of the population turning into drink or drugs to cope with everyday life. Pubs and music halls were many in number in the East End, and drink was cheap too, making it a viable means of escapism for many. It comes as no surprise that, as a result, crime rates spiraled and were unimaginable by London's police force in 1888. Petty crime, like the street theft, was commonplace, alongside more serious disturbances like alcohol-related violence, gang crime, and even protection rackets. The high level of prostitution meant that vulnerable women were often forced to earn a living in the streets, leaving them as easy targets for assault, rape, or even murder. Police stations and the detectives at helm lacked structure and organizations, with many crimes being mislabeled, evidence going missing or being tampered with, and, in the case of Jack the Ripper, violent serial killers left to roam the streets of London. The maze of dingy alleyways and dark courtyards, each with multiple entrances and exit points, made the district even more difficult to the police. There were even some parts of Whitechapel that police officers were afraid to enter, making them crime hotspots. And so here we are, the hunting grounds of the world's most notorious serial killer, Jack the Ripper. Hello, everyone, and welcome to True Serial. What was your thoughts on the intro video? It was something I thought about throwing together, and something we used to do on cults and conspiracies. I thought we'd give it a shot. What'd you guys think?
Yeah, it's good.
I did. I like the backdrop, like being able to see the area and everything, you know, throwing all those visuals in there helps you understand like the time frame.
It sets the mood as well. I mean, when you understand the desperation of the era, because
right.
I mean, most people in Western societies now would not know what that was like.
Because that town was terrorized when this was all going on. They were literally terrorized by everything that was going on. It was a real, horrible horrible situation for them. People were like not walking out by themselves, and and now you can
people
see
were already
why.
scared of dying in that area.
Yeah,
and
they
this
were like
happened.
hopeless
Yeah.
like that, and then to have this happen, and you could see why. Like it was the type of people, the type of woman that was chosen and everything. That was just prevalent. It was just like a breeding ground for it. The destitution, like those visuals, that really hit me. Those visuals really hit me.
What do you think, Megan?
I think that intro is really good, especially because it kind of opens up to the fact that a lot of crimes, like you had mentioned, happened and were so like they were ignored because of it, because of the area they're in and how bad it was back before, and the fact that that's probably a big reason why Jack got away with everything.
Yeah, that there probably were even more victims than we know because they just weren't even looked for, right? They weren't even.
Yeah, and they could have been murdered a different way that didn't spark the interest in putting the cases together either.
Yeah.
Cool. So I want to introduce everybody. Those of you that watch us, you know me and Claire. Most of you should know who Jen is. Jen's been with me for going on damn near 3 years now.
Yeah.
And now
And now I do want to introduce Megan. For those of you that don't know, Megan is my daughter. She is a true crime fan herself. So she was really interested in jumping in on this one. And hopefully we'll get her back into some more when she feels a little bit more comfortable. But like I said, I want to thank everybody in the chat because we've got, the regulars are here. And then I see some new names. Spooky History.
Yep.
I think I've seen Spooky before. Shoo.
Yep.
That's first time
They're
seeing
fans. Yeah, I think they've seen them over on Monday. They're both great accounts. Yeah.
So I wanted to thank everybody that's here with us. As always, we have Always Grateful.
Yeah, always.
Yep. Of course, my stalker Raven. She's here. Love you, baby. Krabby, she's a regular fixture. We all love Krabby.
Yes, she's a favorite, a number one.
Krabby's trying to catch up. Says, "Hi, Claire, Raven, almost here. I'll be up to speed in a minute. Try not to laugh at Jay at 1.5 speed."
Yeah, we try. Yeah.
To be fair, we try not to laugh at Jay at normal.
Jay, we do. It's in the contract that we had to sign, but
yeah.
But Jen and I don't always follow that rule. Like,
no.
Yeah. We take our cues from Chris as far as that goes.
I know. Yes, Megan, I agree. You get the fun. You get the laugh on a regular basis.
I have so many.
You don't even get you're not even threatened to get kicked. You don't get threatened to be kicked from the channel or anything.
Try me.
Try. This could be fun. Yeah, I got to get her in the Discord, Jay. So murder minion number one. Yeah.
Oh, Shay got the bot. I was wondering to see who was going to grab the bot first.
No. Oh, good job, guys. Good job. Good. Yeah.
So, like I said, today we're talking about probably the world's most notorious and infamous and most famous serial killer of all, Jack the Ripper. Like you said, Jack was 1888. And to this day, we still don't know who Jack was. There are several theories out there, including one I'm interested to hear, but we'll get to it a little bit later, is the Jack was a woman. I've heard it, but I never really looked into it. Everybody from Jeff Mudgett, formerly, for those of you not sure who Mudgett was also known as H.H. Holmes. And there was a couple other things. One of the most prevalent ones was Montague Druitt, who was a barrister. But we'll get into who we think, and our takes on who Jack was and what that, and as we get into a little later. There are some things we need to talk about, though, with Jack, because we know the canonical five. Mary Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly. Most people don't realize that there are 4 other victims that they believe are linked to to Jack. The first one of these victims was Emma Smith. Now, do you guys know who Emma Smith was?
Name's familiar, but I can't recall.
Yeah, same.
Okay. So the first of these victims, which they believe is the first before the canonical five, was Emma Smith. She was attacked in the early hours of April 3rd, 1888. Now remember, Jack's first confirmed victim was August 31st of 88. So this is a few months earlier. She was attacked and later died of her injuries at the London hospital. As the result, hers was the first name to appear in the Whitechapel murder files. So another name, most people think of Jack the Ripper. You think, obviously the first thing that pops up is Jack the Ripper, the Whitechapel, in Whitechapel. Mm-hmm. But back then it wasn't known as the Jack the Ripper murders. It was known as the Whitechapel murders.
Right.
Yeah.
So Emma Smith, now though they think she almost certainly was not a victim of Jack, because before she died, she was able to tell the doctor who treated her at London Hospital she had been attacked by a local gang. Now, one of the reasons they think she might have been is because of some of the wounds. She had her stomach was cut open. She was stabbed multiple times. The only difference between her and the canonical fives is her throat wasn't slit. And we'll see when we talk about the canonical five, is every one of those, their throats were slit. So, Krabby said he doesn't sound nearly as funny as you others at 1.5 speed.
Well, thank you.
So that was Emma Smith. Then not a lot to go on her other than she was the first victim in the Whitechapel murder file. So now there's another one. Then the next one we're going to talk about was Martha Tambrin. She's a little bit more known, and they believe that she may actually have been the first. But she's also referred to as Martha Turner. Now, she was killed on August 7th, just the beginning of the month, before Jack started his reign. She was found in George Yard, a sordid thoroughfare that led, and for that matter, still leads off Whitechapel High Streets. She had been subjected to a horrendous and violent attack, in the course of which she had suffered 39 frenzied stab wounds to her throat, chest, and abdomen. Now, the problem with that, the case against her being a victim, is that her throat hadn't been cut, and she had not been disemboweled, injuries that almost all the canonical five later endured. But evidence suggests that she was a victim of a killer that targeted her throat and abdomen just as Jack did. So it's kind of one of those, is Jack trying to, is this an early kill? Is he still trying to get his, what we would call his method of operation, his modus operandi, as you would, so to speak. So that's kind of where a lot of people lean with Martha Tambrin. She was actually Jack's very first victim, where Jack was still trying to get and figure out what they were going to do. So before we cut into the other canonical five, we do need to talk about Leather Apron. Do you guys know who Leather Apron was?
No.
Nope.
No, none of you?
No, I'm trying to see what we're referring to here, but that's a person that they think was Jack the Ripper?
Yep. I didn't go into detail in my notes on Leather Apron because it was kind of a one of those whatever, because he was found that he didn't do it. But he was an actual butcher and almost like an enforcer type in Whitechapel at the time. They think he may have been linked to other murders in the area. But
his name was what? John Pfizer or something like that?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. But he was known because he always wore the leather butcher's apron and carried carried a cleaver or a butcher's knife with him. So he was investigated first off just after the first victim, Mary Nichols, was found, because he had been in the air earlier that day and doing his leather apron stuff, but they determined that his alibi checked out and
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't there. It wasn't him. So, but a
Oh
lot
well,
of people still believe that he may have been involved.
yeah. Here's a statement from that period of time in 1888, like September. There was that Inspector Joseph Helton who was checking out all this stuff in the J division there, but he actually said the inquiry has revealed the fact that a man named Jack Pfizer, alias Leather Apron, has for some considerable period of time been in the habit of ill-using prostitutes in this and other parts of the metropolis, and careful search has been and is continued to be made to find this man in order that his movements may be accounted for, although at present there is no evidence whatsoever against him. So just because he was ill-using like people were in such a panic, like you wear a leather apron because you were a butcher or you had a knife or you just like mistreated a prostitute, you were a Jack the Ripper suspect. Like there must have been millions of them. There was Sam.
Well, it would have been like now if you have a bad case of somebody doing horrific things in the neighborhood. Everyone phones in and reports their neighbor because of fear. And this would have been the same sort of thing. My butcher has blood on his apron. How did I get there?
Well, I can tell you they did conduct 2,000 interviews. More than 300 people were actually investigated, and at least 80 people were detained. During the investigation.
Yep. In the newspaper, they're going, the public are looking for a monster, and the legend of this leather apron. The Whitechapel part of them seem to be inventing a monster to look for. Everyone is turning everyone else in. The kind of invention ought to be discouraged in every possible way. Like the newspapers are actually saying that. Like, you're all getting crazy. Like, simmer down. Like, a touch of fire with the district in the mood that it's really like everything is getting out of control. Like that's actually in the paper. Like 7 days later, yeah, boy, it was everybody was accusing everybody. Like, boy, yeah. But I can understand the fear. Those murders are gruesome. They were for the time very chilling. Very chilling.
What we're gonna do now is we're gonna look at the canonical 5 because we need to get this out of the way so we can actually explain what's going on, so we know what, and then we'll go into some other stuff here. So I want to read to you. This is something I pulled from jacktheripper.org. Wonderful site. Everything you ever want to know about Jack the Ripper is on that site. Including photographs, which I'm not going to show any photographs because they're, if you've seen them, you know what I'm talking about. They are brutal. So this is coming from the Jack the Ripper website. This is on the first victim, Mary Nichols. So it says at around 3:40 a.m. on August 31st, 1888, Charles Cross was making his way to work along Bucks Row, a cobbled Whitechapel street that was lined on one side of a warehouse buildings and the other row by two-story houses. As Cross approached a looming bulk of the 1876 board school that dominated the western end of Bucks Row, he noticed something lying in the gateway on the left side of the street. Like so many districts, alleyways, and passages, street lighting on Bucks Row was minimal. So at first, Cross couldn't be sure what exactly the bundle was. It looked like something was a discarded tarpaulin, and so Cross went to inspect it. But as he drew closer and realized it was in fact the prone form of a woman who was either dead or drunk. As Cross stood rooted in the spot and unsure what to do next, he heard footsteps behind him. Turning, he saw Robert Paul walking towards him. "Come and look over here," Cross called. "There is a woman lying on the pavement." The two women stepped gingerly over the road and stooped down over her. She was laying on her back, legs spread out, and her skirt was raised almost above her waist. Charles Cross reached down, touched her face, which was warm, and her hands were cold and limp. "I believe she's dead," he observed. Meanwhile, Paul placed his hand on the woman's chest and thought he felt a slight movement. "I think she's breathing, but it's very little if she is." Paul suggested they sit the woman up, but Cross refused to touch her again. So decidedly, perhaps somewhat callously, they were late for work and did as much as they could. They pulled her skirt back down to her knees to cover her decency and set off for their respective places of informants, agreeing to tell the first policeman they encountered to what their find was. But what neither man noticed in the pitch darkness of Buck Row was the woman's throat had been slashed so severely that her head had almost been cut from her body.
Mm.
So that right there is the first known victim of the canonical five. That would be Mary Shelley, Mary Nichols.
Mary Nichols.
One thing, the reason I read that because there was something I wanted to point out here is when Cross and Paul found her, she was still warm.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll find that out on a couple other victims. These victims are found almost immediately afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So Jack had to do what he did quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Or she.
Or she, yeah.
Yeah. So give a little bit more. So what Jack actually did, her throat had been slit twice from left to right, and her abdomen had been mutilated with one long, jagged wound, several incisions across the abdomen, and 3 or 4 similar cuts in the right side of her right side caused by the same knife, estimated to be 6 to 8 inches long, and was used violently and in a downward movement.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why when we talked earlier about Martha Tambrin, that's why they believe that she may have been his first actual victim because of the similarities between the two.
Mm-hmm.
So I said this was August 31st. Now we're going to get into some things here. And I do want to state it clearly that we are going to get into more sometimes I'm sorry. I try to keep up with the chat as I'm talking, and I just seen Krabby's said I'm sure I'll be yellow again by the end of the stream. I get a kick out of making Jay laugh. So thoughts on Nichols before we move on to Annie Chapman? Anything you guys want to say? Anything you want to discuss about the first victim?
Just the way they're finding the body, and it is still warm. It's like Jack. I always felt that Jack found great joy and pride in taunting the police. Like, he was not afraid of getting caught. He actually thought he was much smarter than they were. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was actually there watching discover that body.
That's what a lot of people believe is Jack was actually there at all 5 crime scenes.
Yeah.
Watching.
Because and the fact that the body is still warm when they're coming upon it, it's I think he doesn't get as much credit for the planning of these murders. Like they because of the violence of them and because of the type of victims that he's choosing, I don't think they realize the planning that he's actually doing ahead of time until you get to the last ones, and then you realize it is all kind of thought out ahead of time.
Yeah. And you realize that Jack is
he had
really well aware of what they're doing and exactly what they want out of it. So
exactly, and this is why I can't sign up for the woman theory about it. Although I do admit it's quite possible when it comes to how his actions, his love of it. When I read his letters, the chilling to the bone that I get, I cannot actually imagine a woman getting that far into it for some reason. Because when I think of it's just science, just the way that we think and our duality as a woman, I cannot see us getting there that easily. I'm not saying it's not possible. I just say it just takes a little credence.
There have been women serial killers who are every bit as violent.
Oh, I know. I just did Catherine Knight.
Yeah, I'm sorry,
that son of a bitch. Yeah, I just did. I know it's possible. I'm just saying it's a little less for me. The way those letters, the way he wrote about his enjoyment of it, his night, what he's looking for.
Yeah. If you go with Anne Nichols and if you talk about the wounds other than slicing the neck and disemboweling, which he really didn't get to the point of full disemboweling with Anne.
Yeah.
Anyway, which just goes to show that he must have been really close when they found
Mm-hmm.
He hadn't finished what he'd started. But the
Mm-hmm.
attack to the vagina, and then later on in the other ones, the fact that that extends further than just attacking the vagina. The initial thought of anybody seeing that would be go, oh, that's a guy hating on women.
Mm-hmm.
But that can also be a woman who's been scorned.
It could be.
So that is actually a good segue, because Megan is a real proponent of Jack being a female, and this would be a good opportunity to get your thoughts, Megan. Why do you think Jack is a woman and not a man?
Well, generally, women are easier to scorn. Yeah, so Jen, I agree with that. I definitely think that was part of it. But I think that it's also more of a scorn in the fact that it's revenge in a sense, because if Jack was a woman and trying to get into the medical field, and then men after men after men were like, no, that's not something that you know, because at that time that wasn't a thing. And, you know, maybe she was even a midwife and attacking the area of her design specialty. Like maybe that's not where she wanted to be in the medical field. Maybe she wanted to do something else, but the men said no. So then also women are a lot more like the way that the way that women in general will word things, and they have such a deep thought that I don't think men would be able to wrap their mind around. No offense to men, but it's more of emotional, more of a straight fact.
Everything in it is, I'm going to take from you something that was taken from me.
Right, and if she was taking away everything she had.
And the only way you can see that when you see the tax that was tax on the vagina, the removal of uteruses from victims and things like that, it doesn't play out as something a man would do. That that's a woman who's lost. That's a woman who hasn't that like. I mean, I could totally imagine that this was a woman, perhaps as Megan said, who was a midwife, who was perhaps raped by a doctor, and then
also like forced to be in that field she didn't want to.
Yeah, forced to be. You add all those things up to a woman, and that woman would take revenge. And she's saying she was treated like if she was treated like a prostitute by the people who were supposedly her colleagues and things like that, she might take this back out on women who she perceived as being prostitutes.
Well, even that, but if she was forced into, like, let's say she wanted to do the medical field and she was pushed into being a midwife because that was the only acceptable position in her time, then turn around and that's not what she wanted. She's going, and then, I mean, imagine all of her colleagues treating her like she was nothing but a prostitute and nothing but garbage. I mean, a woman is going to eventually snap and take out. And I mean, they can be very, very deadly with each and every killing. I mean, that's why I think that there was more victims than what was actually listed.
I actually agree with the more victims part of it, but I don't know. I'm still not there with the woman. I'm really having a hard time with that.
Yeah,
because
neither were the police at the time, because what they did was they saw the attacks and decided that they were too violent to be something that a woman would do. They would have taken more strength, or they would have taken. But what you fail to understand is if you have the right implements, the right tools, you have the right training, so you know where to attack, you can make something that looks very violent without having to put as much effort in as if you were somebody who was untrained.
Now, I just think that yes, the killings appear to be very personal and emotional that way, but the rest of the story, the letters, the taunting, and all of that, I can't see.
There is no proof that the letters are from Jack. There were so many people who wrote so many things. Part of the problem with this discovering it, figuring out what was going on now, is the fires destroyed most of the evidence that had been collected. Yeah. So there is the evidence that we have that the police had collected at the time now is only a small subset of what was actually available to them at the time. And the police didn't do a particularly good job at the time either. So
and there's also a theory that Jack could, if a male, it could have been a man and wife combination too. I mean, you could also take into consideration the fact that was also something that nobody would have assumed back then either. If they were both messed up and scorned, I mean, there could have been easy aspects. That's why I think that's part of the reason why people can't pinpoint whether it's a female or a male, is because there's too much evidence that points to both.
Yeah,
that's a good point. That's a good point.
and a husband and wife going off the rails and doing stuff like this.
Not abnormal.
Well, Bernie's in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and that's basically two people going completely off the rails and doing exactly the same thing as Jack the Ripper, you know. So yeah, it's quite possible. Yeah, it was maybe not a husband and wife, but yeah,
a couple of some type.
A couple of some type. Yeah.
Now that is one of the theories that Jack had a partner. That the partner would lure the women into the alleyway and Jack would attack from behind.
Yeah.
But I do want to go back to the female perspective on this. Now, from what from what I've read and what I've studied, because most of you know that this is the type of thing that I look at, and not the legal stuff like Claire does, because that's why we make a good team.
No, thanks.
I look at this part and I go, I don't see where this could have been the attack of a female. Now, just because of the brutality that was inflicted on a couple of these women. Now I can see where maybe Mary Nichols was maybe done by a woman, because of the multiple stab wounds across the abdomen. Her throat was cut twice. That would sound like a scorned wife or a scorned girlfriend type of thing. That one I can get behind. But the cases of Ann Chapman, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Kelly, the brutality of it to me does not read female. Now we have seen.
I just love that attitude that women can't be that brutal.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying.
We're not saying they can't, because obviously we've done cases where we absolutely know they can.
Oh, yeah.
But what I'm saying is, I'm not trying to say women can't do it. What I'm saying is women tend not to, with few exceptions. I mean, we talked about Catherine Knight was one, where she, cut the guy up, skinned him alive, fed him in his stew, that type of thing. So that it's possible there, but it is unlikely. And when you see serial,
it would have to be. Go on. I'm sorry.
That first murder that happened, where, like you said, that you could see how a woman could be involved. But what if she transitioned into realizing, oh, hey, this is actually something I want, like, enjoy doing, and now it moved from revenge and scorn into curiosity and getting out frustrations in her everyday life.
Well, because I was going to explain that when we got to Ann Chapman. Annie Chapman.
Well, I'm a step ahead of you then.
Yeah. Because almost no, I can't say almost no. Generally, women don't have a sexual component to their serial killings. When they kill it in a serial killer type, sexual motivation is never, almost never, a reason behind it. It's usually financial or power or revenge type thing. It's almost negative, never sexual. In the case of Ann Chapman, you could definitely see where she was, first off, the strangulation, that is what they consider is not a female way to kill people. Serial killer or people to kill women usually don't strangle someone.
That's right.
With her part of her uterus missing, there's a sexual component there with the female body part.
I would disagree with that.
And maybe they're reading too much into it.
The removal of the uterus would be a revengeance thing, not.
It could be. Yeah, it could be a statement against the woman. Yeah.
I think that was misread by the police at the time. Oh, this has to be sexual because the vaginas were stabbed, and that's a man thing, stabbing. No, but they're missing the whole concept of vengeance there. And I think that there's a real problem with the way that the police looked at it at the time.
And that's why I'm going back to my theory of a midwife.
Look at it now. It's not. You take out the uterus. That's not a thing a man would do. They wouldn't even be thinking about the uterus.
Right.
But it's a thing a woman would do.
And if you do go back to your thing about the midwife, it could be that maybe these are actual procedures that went bad, and this is a cover up with the murder.
I
Actually,
mean, I can kind of see it that way, but I think it's more or less. I still think it's a signature for her. I think it's a signature of saying, I'm going to kill and brutally kill these women because I'm going to pretty much stab you back for making me be into a keeping me only as a midwife and not letting me grow in the medical field. And that's why I think that it's always got an underlining of a revenge, but it's also got the fact that she was so overlooked by literally everything.
Yeah, but why women then? You see, that's the problem I have with the theory. Me as a woman, if I'm pissed off because the man's holding me down, I'm cutting penises. I'm not taking out vaginas. Sorry.
Unless she's trying to frame a man.
Maybe that,
unless
but
she's
I'm
trying
telling
to
you,
make
like,
it assume. And
maybe I'm a little more direct. I'm a little more direct. Like, I'm not going to blame the women for holding me down. Obviously, they're not the ones holding me down. Not the prostitutes. I could tell you, if you're a midwife, it wasn't the prostitutes that were holding you down.
Unless she wasn't getting enough attention. Like, let's say she were to kill people before, Jack's major victims, like, the ones. What if she decided she wasn't getting enough attention that she wanted and decided to go against women to make it look like a man's crime?
I just think the removal of the uterus, the removal of the feminine parts on the bodies by whether it a man or a woman was definitely done as a demeaning and dewomanizing move. Like, it was taking away the essence of what a woman was, period. So I have a hard time believing that that was a woman who did it for whatever reason, especially one that says that the man held me down, because it is not the women, the prostitutes, that are doing that. It was the man. So I would, be going for other anatomy at that point if it was revenge. Now, there are many other reasons it could have been done. It could have been maybe this is a woman who was a midwife, like you say, and she's got training, and maybe the prostitute is ruining her life because she has a venereal disease now because her husband couldn't keep it in his pants. And I think then she would be attacking prostitutes. That makes more sense to me. That's personal. But to put the whole, like, the man is holding me down, so I'm going to start taking uteruses out, to me, that don't play. Like, I can't even wrap my mind around it because, I would think there would be another way to exercise that feeling in a more direct and productive way. Like, if it's the man, go for the man.
I mean, that can also wrap back into Jen's theory too about how, maybe it was more of a cover up for a botched
procedure, because abortions were illegal at that time, and that, and prostitutes would be the ones that were going for these procedures more often because of frequency, just the numbers, just because of the numbers. So,
my problem with it is people say that the removal of the uterus and stuff like that, and the posing of the bodies is something that's sexual. And there was no evidence at the time that these women were sexually interfered at all. That the going through the bodies and looking at was something calculated, something
exactly. It was demeaning. It was meant
demeaning, yes, but not sexual. It was
not sexual. No.
So
it was,
which is another thing for it being a woman doing it to women.
I want to read.
Not sexual.
I want to read on some comments, and then we need to move on here. But this interesting theory, I do like where you guys are coming from. We're going to start with Raven. She says it's not unlikely. No bodies removed, so strength wasn't a factor there. The serial component was assumed. It could have been exploratory. Shay says an infertile woman would do that. The removal of the uterus. The removal of uterus can be seen as a power move. Krabby says because they were women of low status and even got the men's attentions and she didn't. That's possible there. Now, one of the big things that Raven had said here, getting fresh bodies to learn on, because as she says later on, people learn on corpses. Women couldn't get them legally, and it would have been difficult for her to steal one like men did. So there is that action. I get that. She also says it may not have been a revenge issue. Yeah, Raven's she's on par with you guys.
Yeah.
Do you see
now-
that?
No, hang on just a second. And Shay said he was thinking the same thing as Claire. PP goes first. Now, where's that one? Okay, wine is cheaper than therapy says, I just got here and I have a question. Is the woman unable to have children? Is it a maternal jealousy?
That's another theory, is that she is has suffered that kind of a loss and is actually demeaning the women for misusing their God-given gift. They would go for a prostitute like that and think that they are misusing their God-given gift to have children and settle down and all that other. And they might be very, very angry about that.
Maybe she's trying to figure out why she's infertile, so she's experimenting on the women she's killing.
Yeah, there's that too. There's that too.
Yeah.
So, good theories. I like it. That's why it was one of the reasons we do this. So we're going to move on. We kind of talked about Annie Chapman. I do want to go over just a couple things on her, and then we'll move on real quick. Her neck was cut jaggedly all the way around, nearly all the way around. Her vertebral column bore striations from how her neck was cut. She was disemboweled with her intestines thrown over each shoulder, and part of her uterus was missing. Her face and tongue were swollen. Leading medical examiners believe she was asphyxiated with a handkerchief that was found around her neck prior to her throat being cut. And it was Annie Chapman's murder that the unease that had been bubbling away in the area since the murder of Mary Nichol gave way to outright panic. I said, I understand where you guys are coming from, but from what I've studied and what I still don't see. I can see how you would come to the thing with a female serial killer, Jack being female. I don't see it, but I understand why you would go that way.
I'm with you, Jay, especially on this murder, because I cannot see, with all the theories that we're talking about, the anger that the woman had and the displaced, whether it be childbirth or whether because, she'd been kept down by the man because she wanted to do more with her life. The way that neck was cut, that was... and then the strangulation again, it just to me it doesn't fit. It just naturally I'm going more towards a man doing this for other reasons. Yes, still trying to dewomanize the woman and demean her. And I agree with Jen, it's not sexual. There's nothing sexual about taking your bowels out and putting them over your shoulders. There's just nothing there. It just doesn't make any sense. Most of these murders did not have a sexual connotation. They had a demeaning and demoralizing and a make you less than component, a true component of that. The posing of the bodies, the type of victim that it is, the way the murders are done.
See, here's a problem with that theory, though. Just because nothing sexual was done to the bodies does not mean that the killer was not having a sexual gratification doing what he did.
I will be the first one to say that Jack the Ripper, whoever the hell you are, you loved doing this. And it was clear when I read I get chills when I read the words. I get chills when I hear about the bodies. They enjoyed every second of it. Now, whether they got their rocks off or not, like we weren't there, we don't know. But I'm sure the pleasure endorphins were engaged in some way, whether it be sexual or not. They loved every second of this. Every fucking
Raven
second
makes a good point, Jack.
I was going to bring that up. She says, your whole life, Jack, was a man and always betrayed as a man. How much is based on that? I can see that because that is how Jack is betrayed. And I do understand.
It feels
for me, it doesn't.
Yeah, it just feels.
I don't see a woman being as brutal, especially with when we get to Mary Kelly.
You know what did it for me? That last one, the actual last one, is what seals the deal for me. There is no way I can believe that a woman got there.
We have stories of women being exactly this brutal, if not more brutal. What about the two lesbians who had a son and castrated their own child, then flayed them alive?
Yeah, but these are acts of passion. This was a controlled
That
process.
Wasn't an act of passion at all. That was completely psychotic.
Well, you know what yeah, this is true. I agree. That was psychotic. It definitely
That was completely psychotic.
Yeah.
Okay, yes, it was done
But
to a
the
child of about
actual
7 or 8. But
the
irrelevant, the degree of violence and everything that women can portray is
wasn't
identical to what men can.
I know, but the degree of violence in the last murder that we know about, the actual gratification, the time that was taken, the actual completing of the process, there's just for all the reasons that we're saying we think it's a woman, that part does not match. Because whether it was just a man held me down, that, and everything.
I am a complete opposite on you on that one, Claire, because that's the only one I could see a female committing.
Yeah, but I can't. I can actually not see that one. It's just bizarre.
I honestly think Raven's point here is so apt. We have been so long said, "Oh, it was a man. It was a man." We depicted as a man in all the books and all the TV shows that say, "Oh, guess who it was," and everything. That you forget that it could have been a woman, and it could have easily been a woman. There is nothing in here, even the strangulation thing. They suspect she was strangulated, but you've got to allow for the forensic things at the time. It's quite possible, because she still had a throat slit and everything like that. She could have just choked on her own blood instead of choking from being physically choked, and they would not have known how to tell the difference at all. Okay, and that would signify that the person didn't cut quite as deep as what they thought they had. So then the person would choke on their own blood rather than die directly from the blood loss, which would point to being a woman rather than a man, because you're talking about slightly less strength to be able to do what they're doing. So,
but there was
it can go either way. The lack of the remaining physical evidence plus the techniques used at the time for doing that forensic evidence makes it really hard with just these mild descriptions that we have of what happened to get into the mindset of exactly what the person was like, what the person could have been capable of. Exactly. If you use modern forensic techniques, you'd be able to go over the body and say, yeah, okay, the person who did this cut had to be this tall. They had to have this amount of strength. They had to use this sort of knife. And we'd know, and we'd go, okay, this person has to be 6'6". They have to have this much strength. Okay, most likely this is a dude. There could be a woman, but that's unlikely. Yeah. Whereas if you get your result back that the person's 5'6" and they only need this much strength, well, all of a sudden that could be a short dude or a woman
or a tall woman.
But there we go. That they didn't have the forensic capabilities at the time to get around that, and the thinking of the time was women were meeker or weaker. This is not a sort of thing a woman would do. So the authorities at the time instantly thought it would be a man. So all the documentation was written as though it was a man. So history is passed down that it was probably a man. So we're looking at it now that it must be a man.
Yeah. And I don't think
it's very much in our heads.
Yeah, but I'm not saying I don't think a woman could do it. I'm not being like that. I'm saying that, you're using examples like, well, they didn't move the bodies. Well, an egomaniac, like he is portrayed, wouldn't move the body anyway. He wants to discover. He wants you to get all the evidence.
No. I don't think the body means anything at all.
But
like I said, I'm not. Man or woman, they wanted the bodies discovered. They wanted people to know what they'd done.
I'm saying it doesn't,
and they were enjoying it. I don't know if that was the case with the first one with Mary Ann Nichols. I don't know if that was the case. I think there was more a case that the police or the discoverers showed up before he or she was expecting it. And then she got a thrill out of the fact that it was discovered, and then they wanted it discovered after that.
Yeah, I think a woman quite possibly. There's no reason that they could not have done this. All of the technique, all of the rage, a woman could definitely have done it. I don't really think it's like a man-woman thing that way. It just feels, for the reasons and what was done, and then the taunting of the police and like the whole picture. When I look at the whole picture, I just don't feel a woman. I definitely, regardless of how they portray him, I just still feel Jack is of male connotation there. But I think for me, the tipping part of it is the arrogance. That's what I keep coming back to, the arrogance of it.
I'll be able to come back in.
Yeah.
Yeah. And yet, why take trophies of the uterus? Because that's legitimately what Jack did. The uterus was not found in these bodies. It wasn't something left out. Yeah. It was taken.
It was the demeaning. It was the taken. And the taken as a trophy, they just...
But why
I hate to say it, but that's definitely a male trait.
I don't see that, Claire. I would see that if a man wanted to take a trophy, it would be something more visual, or something more akin to what they want. But a woman taking a trophy, especially if she was somebody who for some reason couldn't have a kid, or if that was something child related that way, I could totally see her taking.
We can find motive that way by saying Jack is pissed off because his woman had an abortion.
Okay, yes, I could see that too.
See, so I can do like the same thing, like the woman's rage that would feel that. Jack could too. He would take a uterus every goddamn time if that happened against his will and he had feelings about it. And that's what I mean. It's like a trophy like that. It was definitely demeaning towards the woman to take the womanhood part, the decision part, away from them in some manner, whether it was a man or a woman that committed it. That is actually the motive there, is to demean them as women, absolutely.
Megan will be back. Her phone was dying. She's got to switch over.
Okay.
So let's move on, and we'll.
You weren't expecting this, were you, Jay?
I wasn't expecting this long of a conversation on this, but you guys, you do bring up good points.
I am kind of on the fence. I strongly think it could have been a woman who did it. Mm-hmm. But it could have equally have been a man. But I think stating, it was a man who did it is just wrong and ignoring a lot of the evidence that is
because we don't know enough about what happened.
No, we really
don't have enough to say either way. That's just it.
I think if we had a lot of the other evidence, if a lot of the other evidence hadn't been destroyed in the fires, I think we might have more knowledge about what was going on.
Right.
But we don't have full, even for the time. I mean, autopsy reports went great, but we don't have full autopsy reports on all of it. We don't have all the information. A lot of the information we have is what was printed in the papers and not what was written on the police reports. So it's very much written. It's written in the perspective of the mind's eye of the people who were there at the time. And it was going to be anyway, but it's not going to be as clinical as something now. I mean, when reports are written now, they are clinically written to exclude things that they don't know. That
they don't know. It's right.
You don't surmise in the clinical reports. You don't go, maybe it was this. No, you use the full evidence. But back then they did. They go, oh no, it must have been, and then that's taken as factual as far as these guys, that there was no clinical separations. I mean, we still have it now where people write their preconceived ideas into police reports, and that's where we end up with crappy convictions. But it doesn't happen as much now as what it would have back then. So these preconceived ideas would have gone all the way through in it, and it would have changed the way things were written, and it would especially would have changed the way the press wrote about it, which means we are looking at the evidence through the skew of the time, which makes it a lot harder because a lot of the evidence will be written in a male-centric way because it was written by men and the men would have been assuming it was a man who did it, regardless of whatever the evidence showed. So we are going to have to try and dig under that skewed evidence anyway. So I think it's almost impossible to tell if it was a man or a woman from the evidence because the evidence is so skewed.
It is, because we don't even know, like you said, we don't know if he wrote the letters. We don't know, like, the evidence that we have, if it's actually, accurate. We don't know. We only know what they're depicting. And like you said, at the time too, the media is so skewed, not only that it being male oriented, but that the fact that they were trying to tamper down a pandemic of attack, like a fear mongering and stuff like that they were actually trying.
Isn't it amazing we haven't had a major serial killer during this pandemic?
How do you know? I don't think we know yet.
Yeah, that probably wouldn't be running to report it, to be honest.
Yeah, Jay taught me how to be a serial killer a week ago. So,
unfortunately, Claire, if there was one, that's most likely going to be in your country.
You know what? We do have the most of them. That's the sad part. I showed Jay the list.
Really, we've had some good ones here. Well, I won't say good ones. We've had some.
You've had some
prolific ones.
You know what?
Oh,
you guys,
God.
I get the names. You guys are sending them to me. You guys have some really good serial killers. Like they don't mess around.
You've already done have you already done the Bernies?
No,
because one of my exes.
But we will put it on the list because I am looking at couples.
Their in-law's sister was one of the last victims of the Bernies.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear
So
that.
it's that close. I actually know the brother of one of the last victims.
Okay, we need to move on.
Okay.
Megan's having some issues with her phone, so she's going to be in here with me. So if there's an issue with audio, let me know.
That's
Say
fine.
hello, Megan.
Hey.
Hey, Megan.
Right, so everybody can hear her okay?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. So we're going to move on to the next one. We're going to talk about probably one of the most famous ones was Lizzie Stride. Hang on, I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything while we were doing this. Hello, Belinda. Hello,
she was the third victim, right?
Yeah, Lizzie Stride was the third victim. So after an absence of several weeks, the killer returned to the streets of East End in London on the 30th of September and claimed the lives of two victims. This is what is known as the double event. This is where Elizabeth Stride and Catherine Eddowes were both killed. Elizabeth, the first victim was, of course, Lizzie Stride, and it seems highly likely that her killer was interrupted in the act of murder. Unlike the other four canonical Ripper victims, Stride had not been mutilated following her murder, leading some historians to suspect that she had not actually been murdered by Jack. However, Stride's murder occurred less than an hour before the murder of the Ripper's fourth victim, Catherine Eddowes. Stride's body was discovered at approximately 1 a.m. on Sunday the 30th. She had a deep single knife wound to her neck, and her extremities were warm to the touch, and which led when she was discovered, leading medical examiners to believe that she hadn't been dead very long. Once again, she had a handkerchief tightly tied around her neck, and though she was found with no money, further lending the belief that she may not have been a victim of Jack, but of some other assailant. So there is a couple of things with this one because it appears that she may have been robbed, but there is a connection with Lizzie compared to the other ones was the same handkerchief around the neck and throat slashed. Is why she's put in with the canonical victims.
Yeah, because there were so many, copycats too. Like, getting your throat slashed in a robbery at that time was a pretty common thing, I think. Based on what you showed us in the beginning from the area that they were in and what was going on, I would think, it could be true that she's not actually a victim of the Ripper, because nothing else was ripped. She wasn't ripped.
So that they still believe it was she was part, just like I said, because of the same handkerchief and the knife slash, that she was actually still one of his victims. So I mean, there's really not much to talk about Lizzie here. But we're gonna move into the next one with Catherine Eddowes. Now, this is the one that we can tie to Jack because of the same type of things that had happened to her. So the second victim on the 30th was Catherine Eddowes, whose body was found in Mitre Square at 1:45. Her injuries were absolutely horrific. Her face had been disfigured and her throat was cut. And once again, a handkerchief tied around her neck. Her abdomen had been mutilated and her intestines were drawn out and thrown over her right shoulder. Fecal matter was noted smeared all over them also. Her body was quite warm, leading medical examiners once again to believe she had only been dead for less than half an hour. As in other cases, the mutilation was discovered to have happened after death. The left kidney had been carefully removed, which led investigators to believe the killer had great knowledge of the positions of the organs in the abdominal cavity. What ties her to the other ones is the slit throat, the handkerchief, and the intestines, which were the same type of things we've seen with Annie Chapman. There are some things that happened during this point. I believe this is the point where they found the letter, the painting on the wall. I'm trying. Where did I put that? I'm trying to find that in my notes. Okay, it was. I'm sorry. It was after Annie Chapman's murder that the coroners were often within 2 hours, acting on the instruction of the clerk of the workhouse guardians. 2 nurses stripped and washed the body before postmortem could take place. In Edo's case, okay, so yep, my bad. Edo's.
I'm sorry. I opened up my phone.
In Edo's case, a note was written on the wall in chalk stating, "The Jews are the men that will not be blamed for nothing." Believing this would cause anti-Semitic hate crimes and the fact that the shop would soon be opening, the police opted to hastily write down the message and have it removed before photographers could arrive. Upon further analysis of the grammar of the letter, it is believed that the author was possibly Jewish and a non-English speaker who wrote the message to throw off investigators. That kind of points to one of the, as we'll talk here in a little bit, with one of the people they believe was Jack. It links back to that, but we'll see. It was also thought that the Masons had wrote the letter to discredit the Jews during that time, because once again, during that time in 1888, the Jews were not looked upon. It was a lot of anti-Semitic stuff going on in London during that time. So now we're gonna move on to, unless you guys got something you want to talk about Lizzie Stride and Catherine Eddowes, we'll move on to the last.
No, let's move on. I think we've gone too deep into everything.
Yeah, we have. Yeah. So we're going to Mary Kelly.
Yeah, we're going to move on to Mary Kelly. Now, Mary Kelly is the last known Jack victim. The one that he was known to take the most time on. And as we spoke earlier, this is the one that I could see being someone like Megan and Raven and Jen had mentioned, being a female because of the time it took he took with the body, or she took with the body. So on the 9th of November, 1888, the killer, who had now been known as Jack the Ripper, returned and murdered Mary Kelly in her room in Miller's Court. Unlike the other 4 canonical Ripper victims, each of whom had been murdered outdoors and whose mutilations could have been committed within minutes, Kelly was murdered within a furnished single room she rented at 13 Miller's Court, affording her murderer an extensive period of time to eviscerate and mutilate her body. They estimate the mutilations took approximately 2 hours to perform, so they had time to work on the body. The whole surface of the abdomen and the thighs were removed. The abdominal cavity emptied of its viscera. The breasts were cut off. The arms were mutilated by several jagged wounds, and the face hacked beyond recognition of its features. The tissues of the neck were severed all the way around down to the bone. The viscera were found in various parts. The uterus and kidneys, with one breast under the head, another breast by the right foot, and liver between the feet. The intestines by the right side, and the spleen on the left side of the body. The flaps removed from the abdomen and thighs were on the table. The bed clothing at the right corner was saturated in blood, and the floor beneath was a pool of blood covering about 2 feet square. The wall on the right side of the bed and in a line with the neck was marked by blood, which had been struck in several places. Directions, the nose, cheeks, eyebrows, and ears had been partially removed. The lips were blanched and cut by several incisions running obliquely down to the chin. There were also numerous cuts extending irregularly across all features. The neck was cut through the skin and other tissues right down to the vertebrae, the 5th and 6th vertebrae being deeply notched. The skin cuts in the front of the neck showed distinct ecchymosis. I'm not sure what that is. ECCHYMOSIS. So, yeah.
Oh.
The air passage would cut to the lower part of the larynx through the cricoid cartilage. Both breasts were more or less removed by circular incisions, the muscle down to the ribs being attached to the breast. The intercostals between the fourth, fifth, and sixth ribs were cut through the contents of the thorax, visible through the openings. The skin and tissues of the abdomen from the costal arch. The pubes were removed in 3 large flaps. The right thigh was denuded in front of the bone and a flap of skin, including the external organs of generation and part of the right buttock. The left thigh was stripped of skin, fascia, and muscles as far up as the knee. The left calf showed a long gash through skin and tissue to the deep muscle and reaching from the knee to 5 inches above the ankle. Both arms and forearms had extensive jagged wounds. The right thumb showed a small superficial incision about 1 inch long with excavation of blood in the skin, and there were several abrasions on the back of the hand, moreover showing the same condition. It was believed, though, that she was killed by a slash to the throat, and the mutilations were performed afterwards.
Yeah. That ecchymosis is the bruising. It means that the blood was able to come to the surface like a bruise. Before. Okay.
What was that?
If I remember correctly, the things I was reading earlier today, it was rumored that she was actually pregnant, which was one of the assumptions of why they took so long to place this murder. I mean, it was a theory I read, whether it's got a bunch of evidence against it, but I mean, it's also an option to take of why they decided to take so long too. And I mean, if you want to attach an emotional aspect to that as well.
What did they find that shows she was pregnant?
I think it was more of like a word of mouth thing. The people around thought, like people that knew her thought that she was pregnant kind of thing. I didn't really get to dive too much into that before we jumped on here, but I did run across that earlier today. It didn't really have a lot to flow with it. They didn't have enough evidence. It was just more rumor.
So definitely what they believe with the last victim here, Mary Kelly, was that definitely was a work of someone with some general knowledge of anatomy, whether it be a doctor, a physician, a butcher, that type of thing. That's where they lead to looking at who could possibly do this. And
it was careful dissection.
Yeah, it was very precise in what they were doing here. You're right.
Yeah.
So I do want to talk about 2 more people before we get into who they believe, who the most prevalent perpetrators Jack actually was. Because there was 2 more victims afterwards that could have been, but then they decided they couldn't have been. But it is worth noting. The first one was Alice McKenzie. That was in July 17th of 1889. She was laying close to a lamppost on a pavement in Castle Alley, just off of Whitechapel High Street. Her skirt had been pulled up, and there was blood all over her thigh and abdomen, which it transpired was coming from a zigzag, albeit fairly superficial wound that ran just beneath her breast to her navel. I'm not exactly sure why they pulled her into this, because nothing about this says Jack. A lot of people believe that Jack, after Mary Kelly was done, did what he wanted to do, and he was finished.
Yeah.
So it led to a disagreement on whether Alice McKenzie's murder was actually the mark of Jack's return. James Monroe, who had taken over police commissioner from Sir Charles Warren, arrived at the scene at just after 3 a.m. He reported to the Home Office that every effort will be made to discover the murderer, who I am inclined to believe this identical to the tourist Jack the Ripper of last year. Dr. Thomas Bond, who examined the body of Alice McKenzie at the mortuary, was also of the opinion the injury suggested that this was another Ripper killing. But Dr. Phillips, on the other hand, opinion that the wounds were not severe enough to be the Jack-style slayings.
Yeah, I think they just linked that to try to keep Jack going, and honestly, Jack or Jill just died.
Mm-hmm.
That's where my theory is. I think they added too much to it.
It did. Monroe did later change his opinion that it believed that the murder was just an ordinary murder and not the result of a sexual maniac.
I think sexual maniacs.
Frances Cole was the next body. She was found on the 13th of November of 1891. Now, mind you, this is 2.5 years after Alice Mackenzie and almost 3 years since Mary Kelly. It was speculation that she was a victim of Jack, but they arrested a sailor, charged him with a murder. The reason why they thought about this, because once again, it was where'd it go? Once again, it was another zigzag, fairly superficial wound that ran from just beneath the breast to her navel. And I like what Raven says. A lot of papers were sold because Jack so attributed to what you can to him. So, if we can say, is this another victim of Jack? Of course, that's going to sell papers.
Papers, right. There's speculation. There
is a theory.
What?
So if they kept saying that he did all these, future, like these past 2 cases we're talking about here, what if, like, along the lines of the media and everything keeping up, but what if they actually caught him? Like, what if they actually caught him and realized he was like a high person in society, and now they're just trying to cover up and make it seem like Jack's still going, and it's not? There's also that theory.
Yeah.
I don't think that one's necessarily too far-fetched either.
Well, yeah, because there are some things down here. Where'd they go? Because there are people that believe that where'd it go? I have lots of notes. Was physician Sir William Gull.
Yep.
That's
so they get someone high profiled like that. Yeah, you're going to want to cover it up. I want to get into now. What we want to talk about is the.
Granny's coming there. I think they could, being back in the time. Back in a farther time. I mean, you definitely could be. It's definitely easier to hide things before than it is now. Because it was, it's not like we have the big news anchors we have now where everything's going and drama's always going. I think it was a lot easier actually to hide something that big.
Yeah.
There was a movie. It's called I believe it's Murder by Decree, and it's a really good movie. It's Sherlock Holmes tackles Jack the Ripper. And one of the theories they put in that movie, now mind you, it is a movie, but a lot of people believe it was written because of the theories behind it, that it was actually one of the princes, and the actual only victim of the actual real victim of Jack was actually Mary Kelly. The other ones were a ruse to hide who the true victim was, because apparently she had an affair with the prince and had a baby, and yeah, it's a really good movie. If you haven't seen it, I recommend to watch. Yeah, and like Raven said, it was a tough part of town as well, so killings happened all the time.
Yeah, it did.
And then going back to the paper thing, killers do sell papers, like Krabby said, and Shay says, to keep the fear going and profit.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely 100%. Because everybody knows murder, mayhem, destruction, that all sells.
Right. Absolutely.
I'm going to read through these. I don't want to spend too much time on the letters. They're interesting enough, but I don't want to spend too much time on them because, like I said, none of them we can really link to Jack. The Dear Boss letter, which Claire had read in a previous
It was chilling. That's the one that gets me.
Yeah, that is where we actually get the name Jack the Ripper. Was from the near boss. Before it was just known as the Whitechapel murders or the Leather Apron. So the first letter was addressed to the boss, Central News Office, London City, which reads, "Dear boss, I keep on hearing that police have caught me, but they won't fix me just yet. I have laughed when they look so clever and talk about being on the right track. The joke about Leather Apron gave me real fits. I'm down on horrors and I shan't quit ripping them till I get buckled. Grand what the last job was, I gave the lady no time to squeal. How can they catch me now? I love my work and want to start again. Soon you will hear of me and my funny little games. I have saved some of the proper red stuff in a ginger beer bottle over the last job to write with, but it went thick like glue and I can't use it. Red ink is fit enough, I hope, ha ha. The next job I do, I shall clip the lady's ears off and send to the police officers just for jolly, wouldn't you? Keep this letter back till I do a bit more work and then give it out straight. My knife's so sharp, my knife's so nice and sharp, I want to get to work right away if I get a chance. Good luck, yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Don't mind me giving the trade name. Wasn't good enough to post this before I got all the red ink off my hands. Curse it, no luck yet. They say I'm a doctor now. Ha ha. That's the one. That's probably the most famous letter from Jack as the Dear Boss, and then the last one known as From Hell. But we get into that. Huh?
Good movie.
Yeah, it was a good movie. But we get into what is known as the Lusk letters. These were sent to George Lusk, and they were written in a similar hand to that of the Dear Boss letter. So that's why they kind of believe this came from the same person. I write you a letter in black ink, as I have no more of the red stuff. I think you are all asleep in Scotland Yard with your bloodhounds, as I will show you tomorrow night, Saturday. I'm going to do a double event, but not in Whitechapel. Got rather too warm there. Had to shift. No more till you hear me again, Jack the Ripper. I don't see that one being a Jack letter. This is where, with the Lusk letters, that I believe these are just copycats. Someone looking for
15 minutes.
Yeah, 15 minutes of fame, or it's just the newspaper creating something to sell papers.
Well, that was what the police thought at the time, was that the letters were actually written by one of the journalists just so that the papers could publish something and look cool.
Yep, it's probably
to drive, because there was no ethics then. And I mean, papers do crap shit like that these days as well, but they'd get hauled over the coals for it. But back then, Fleet Street could do what it wanted. And it made sense. If you made a letter that sounded like it came from Jack the Ripper, I mean, let's face it, the murderer's not going to sign themselves as Jack the Ripper. That's something someone made up.
Yeah,
it sounded cool. It's not.
That's right.
A murderer is more likely to sign it, you know who.
Right.
Or not sign it at all, actually.
Yeah. So now we move on to another letter. It was actually a postcard.
Say boss.
Yeah, to George Lusk again. It says,
"Say
boss."
Jack postcard.
Yeah. It says, "Say boss, you seem rare frightened. Guess I'd like to give you fits, but can't stop time enough to let your box of toys play copper games with me. But hope to see you when I don't hurry much. Bye bye, boss."
That one sounds more like the first one, actually. Yeah.
I could see that one being from the same hand as the first one, but not so much the second one, and definitely not this last one.
Oh, the last one is just a whole mess. Like that, definitely.
Now this last one is got a little weird stuff. This is definitely one of those that they believe probably wasn't Jack's, because on October 16th of 1988, a small package wrapped in brown paper and bearing an indistinct London postmark was delivered to Lusk in the Evening Post. It was addressed by him by name and bore the name of the street, but not give his house number. The parcel contained a foul-smelling piece of kidney, together with a letter in handwriting of which is the same as the postcard Lusk had received a few days before. Says, "From Hell, Mr. Lusk, sore, S-O-R. I send you half a kidney, but it's spelled Kidney. I took from one woman Prasard,
It's supposed to be preserved, but it's
it
not
was spelled
spelled right.
Prasard, Prasarved. It for you, to Thar. Piece I fried and ate. It was very nice. I may send you the bloody niff that took it out if you only want a while longer. Sign, catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk.
It's so ridiculous. This is not. Yeah, this is like Cockney bullshit.
This is definitely not something that definitely didn't have the same feel as the original letters.
And I mean
or education or grammar or
yes, exactly. And there's definitely an air of education in Jack the Ripper.
Absolutely,
this is somebody who had some education.
I definitely did.
So,
I would agree with that, Jen.
So, let's get into who they believe Jack was. So I'll scroll through some of this. Well, I mentioned earlier they did over 2,000 interviews as carried out by the Victorian police officers. More than 300 people were actually investigated, and 80 people were detained in police custody. It is possible that Jack was one of these, but none of the interviews, investigation, or detentions yielded anything concrete that enabled the police to point the finger at one suspect and say he was Jack the Ripper. Ever since the Jack the Ripper murders ended, suspect after suspect had been put forward as responsible for them. Prince Albert Edward Victor, the author Lewis Carroll, the Freemasons, and Dr. Bernardo are just a few of the more outlandish Jack the Ripper suspects that have been put forward. Others, such as Thomas Cutbush and Carl Feigenbaum, were put forward around the same time of the murders, discarded as likely suspects, and then found themselves brought back into the frame thanks to modern research as their asylum records being open to the public. Now, the most commonly cited suspect, as we talked before, is Montague Druitt, a barrister and teacher with an interest in surgery who was said to be insane and disappeared after the final murders and was later found dead. Michael Ostrog, a Russian criminal and physician who had been placed in the asylum because of his homicidal tendencies. Several other notable Londoners in the area, such as painter Walter Sickert and physician Sir William Gull. Now, somebody mentioned earlier that it was interesting about the painters, Walter Sickert. I don't know anything on that one. I hadn't looked up Walter, so I don't know why they thought maybe Walter. Shay says all I can think with Prince Albert is he in a can?
Is he in a can? Right. That's a good one.
If you like it, you should have put a ring on it.
That's right.
Krabby says, I'm going to look for a timeline. I'm sure someone did one. Everyone has a timeline. Maybe another day.
There is. Yeah. There's a ton of them. I mean, there's so many. There's like Walter Sickert, Charles Cross, Frederick Deeming. Like there's so many. No.
Now, I mentioned earlier H.H. Holmes. Now, there is a kind of an interesting story here, but we got to take this kind of with a there's no way to actually link this one and prove. Well, you'll understand in a minute. So Jeff Mudgett, a lawyer and former commander of the U.S. Naval Reserve, claims that his great-great-grandfather H.H. Holmes was in fact Jack the Ripper. Mudgett bases his assertions on the writing in two diaries he inherited from Holmes, which detail Holmes's participation in the murder and mutilation of numerous prostitutes in London. The trail of Jack the Ripper murders ends at the start of 91, and Holmes' murder spree is thought to begin at the end of 91. Should they be the same person, the time works out conveniently for Holmes to travel between England and America. During this gap, ship's records show that H.H. Holmes made this journey, making it plausible that this could be the same H. Holmes as the one who ran the murder castle. Holmes was renowned for being a document keeper. However, between 88 and 91, the time of the Ripper murders, Holmes had no documents and there was no trace of where he was. Despite the beliefs that the Ripper was a messy killer, he was methodical with his killings. Although not on the same meticulous level as Holmes' castle, this could have been the lead up to Holmes to develop his killing style. Jack's final victim being found in bed suggested progression to no longer committing random murders on the street. A whole bunch of blah, 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 blahs. Where'd he go? Okay. Despite what seems to be a lot of evidence linking the killers being the same person, a lot of it can be picked apart. None of the evidence is solid enough to pinpoint the two men as being one person. It is merely circumstantial. Moreover, many people believe that the Dear Boss letter wasn't written by the killer, but a journalist or a local trying to create more action. Holmes was a common name in the 19th century, so this does not prove that H.H. Holmes was a murder castle was in England at the time of the Ripper killings. Holmes was also known to go by different names. His real name was Herbert Webster Mudgett. It could be a coincidence that another H. Holmes was traveling to America in 91. Lastly, why Holmes sought to gain the life insurance money from his victims, thus fueling his greed, the Ripper murdered the poor. There was no financial gains for the Ripper to be carrying out his murders, so he did not murder for the same reasons as Holmes reportedly did. If the motives are different, then the murders could be too. Yeah, I never understood, because he claims that the diaries he got from his grandfather detailed things in it, but there's no way to corroborate that who's to say he just didn't take it out of the papers at the time and read it. Yeah. So there was nothing really there to link H.H. Holmes. I think it was just
there's two separate diaries. They even have a rumor about the man that died in the public hanging wasn't even Holmes, that he tricked somebody to actually take his place there in the gallows.
There's a lot of rumors about Holmes, and one of the things is they actually think a lot of the concepts of the murder castle were greatly exaggerated.
I think it tried to sell a book.
Yeah, basically. And the actual crimes that he was put up for were all ones that people. He was definitely a criminal. He definitely killed people and stuff like that. But was he a serial killer? He was a serial killer in the fact that he killed quite a few people. But most of the people he killed after his first murders were people who'd found out what had happened and he was trying to shut them up. Yeah. So that's not the same as what happened with Jack the Ripper, where it was definitely a serial killer, not shutting people up. There was a pattern there in the way it was. So it's one of those things. I think it's trying to attribute extra stuff to somebody in history so that you can make more money out of your books, perhaps.
Yeah, there's not enough evidence. It's just a coincidence. It was at the same time. I can't see H.H. Holmes being Jack. It
was a very different set of motives by the looks of things.
What sure did help with the storytelling is to add that into the family line.
Also, even if he did go to England for a few months to do something and he was known as a killer, why would he suddenly kill a whole heap of people in England and bring attention to himself? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah. For somebody who was supposedly as intelligent as Holmes was.
Right. And it doesn't actually match how intelligent Jack was portrayed too. And
either, yeah.
Yeah. Or the level of arrogance. There's a difference between ignorance and arrogance. So.
Yeah. Agreed.
So you guys ready to hear the most prevalent and the one that they probably won't believe it was actually Jack the Ripper?
Go ahead. We're here. Yep.
So genetic testing point to Aaron Kaminsky, a 23-year-old Polish Jew and resident of Whitechapel, who is known to have given great animus towards women, particularly prostitutes, and who was hospitalized in an asylum several months after the last murder. Critics do say that the evidence isn't strong enough to declare the case closed. Now, the results from forensic examination of a stained silk shawl that investigators said was found next to the mutilated body of Catherine Eddowes, the killer's fourth victim in '88. The shawl was speckled with what claimed to be blood and semen, the later believed to be from the killer. I'll get to that in a moment because I got a theory on this one. David Miller, a reproduction and sperm expert at the University of Leeds in the UK, claimed that the most systematic and most advanced genetic analysis to date regarding the Jack the Ripper murders. They described extracting and amplifying the DNA from the shawl. The test compared fragments of mitochondrial DNA and the portion of the DNA inherited from only one's mother. Retrieved from the shawl were samples taken from living descendants of Eddowes and Kaminsky. The DNA matches that of a living relative of Kaminsky, they included in the Journal of Forensic Science. The new tests are not the first attempt to identify Jack from DNA. Several years ago, U.S. crime author Patricia Cornwell asked scientists to analyze any DNA samples taken from the letters supposedly sent by the killer to police. Based on the DNA analysis and other clues, she said the killer was the painter Walter Sickert. Though many experts believe that those letters to be fake, another genetic analysis, the letters claimed to be the murderer could have been a woman.
Yeah.
Now, where the evidence isn't strong enough to make a clear case for Kaminsky.
Yeah, the evidence is ridiculous. I mean, you're talking over 100 years later.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
people
also,
trying to do DNA evidence from fragments of evidence that was there at the time that would not have been stored in such a way that could protect the DNA on it, that would have been completely contaminated by anyone who had any access to any of this.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't stand up.
And also the strongest one is their own characteristics of Aaron Kaminsky. Schizophrenic, delusional, paranoid, incoherent. Does that sound like Jack the Ripper to you?
Two things on this one. Always Grateful says, but the most recent mtDNA, which was performed in 2019, did not have the necessary haplotypes to link it to Kaminsky. Now, the other thing was it said blood and semen. Now, remember, during that time, especially the five victims of Jack, they were all prostitutes.
Yeah.
So you can't pull semen from a body of a prostitute and say this was the killer.
Nope.
No.
Yeah. That's the problem, especially during that time, because women didn't bathe very often.
Well,
most people, and not just women, but most people would bathe maybe once a month. So you just the nasty and so much cross contamination and everything else. It to pull that is just. I said I just can't see where they could say that was the killer's DNA. I mean, it's not like they found. Well, you said with the prostitute like that, even if you found a semen inside the vaginal cavity, you couldn't say that was the killer's. You know,
no. I mean, the only if a weapon was left on the scene of the crime and you found DNA evidence of the person there, then that would probably be your closest thing with the
closest thing to DNA. Right.
Yeah. And yet there was only one of the cases was the weapon left on the crime scene because Jack took his or her implements
with him.
Well, he loved that knife. Then he loved that.
Oh
knife.
yeah.
So Hawkskull's got a question that I think Raven did cover this, but I want to talk about it anyways. Hawkskull says, but does anyone consider the possibility that a Loch Ness monster could have been Jack? And Raven says, we did look into Nessie, but she promises she wasn't there, so it couldn't be her.
That's right, because Nessie doesn't lie. You know, Nessie always.
I don't think there's enough big bodies of water in Whitechapel either. So.
Exactly. It was a dry period for her. Oh my god! You gotta love it. You gotta love it. Oh my god!
Always Grateful says that the mtDNA did positively link to Eddowes, but the sample was missing at least 2 nucleotides to link to Kaminsky.
That's right, and that's important. There's science. I like it, and also all the characteristics on Kaminsky anyway. Is like every
Yeah, he was a
single,
nut.
all this time he was a nut, and every single one says he
He
did
was
not
a
have
hack and
homicide.
slasher. He
They didn't.
wasn't methodically cut somebody apart. He was a hack
Listen.
and slash and run.
Exactly. They said he did not have homicidal tendencies, and he was not a danger to others. Like repeatedly, over and over again. Like he was crazy. He had a lot of shit going on, but I don't really think.
Yeah, I mean,
he
if
was
he'd hurt somebody, it
of
would have
that
been
category.
the passion at the time, and not
Exactly.
stay there for 2 hours and cut somebody apart.
It would have been him
It
like
was-
more of like a oops, did I do that? Like not a not a yeah.
I mean, to cut somebody apart like that, as
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper did, requires somebody to
I
be
do
a
not think
sociopath. You have
Yeah,
to
I
be a
don't think-
sociopath at that point.
no, a sociopath, but not a schizophrenic. Like I don't think he had the capacity. I really don't.
You have to have a detachment from your own emotion to be able to spend 2 hours killing someone. Well, you don't spend 2 hours killing them, but because Jack actually killed them first and then cut them apart. So they cut them apart and torture them, killed them, and then treated them as a corpse like a med student would. So that whole concept of a med student looking for corpses to practice on,
yeah, it's possible.
It comes across as something that is very possible. And I mean, wouldn't have been the first time, because there'd been other cases of people killing people so they could get hold of a corpse to practice on in the past before Jack the Ripper. So it's a known thing that happened, and prostitutes were a good target for that because people didn't notice them disappearing.
Yeah, that's right.
And the cops didn't care
nobody's going to look
they
for
were
them.
prostitutes.
And that's exactly why a lot of serial
Invisible
killers
people.
to this day still target prostitutes
We got
and homeless people, because they're people that aren't that aren't going to be missed, and people that are what they consider unsavory people or non-important types. They're going to go missing and nobody's really going to look for them.
Exactly. We got 2 open cases now like that.
So, last thing I want to touch on here is Jack and literary works. So, Jack the Ripper has provided themes for numerous literary and dramatic works. Perhaps the most notable is the horror novel The Lodger by Mary Adeline Lowndes from 1913, which has also inspired numerous films, including Alfred Hitchcock's The Lodger, The Story of the London Fog in 1957. Stephen Knight's 1976 work, Jack the Ripper, The Final Solution, which expanded on a conspiracy theory involving the Freemasons and royalty, which we have talked about earlier. Literature in the late Victorian era, including Arthur Conan Doyle's first Sherlock Holmes stories and Robert Louis Stevenson's Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde, has provided inspiration for story makers who have fused these fictional worlds with the Ripper. Like I told you, I told you about the movie Murder by Decree, the Sherlock Holmes chasing down Jack the Ripper. And if I remember right, in the movie, I can't think of what the hell it's called now. League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. Dr. Jekyll was chasing Jack the Ripper.
Yep. Fantastical story there.
I love that movie. The Ripper makes appearances throughout science fiction horror genres and intentionally recognized as an evil character. The association of the Ripper with death and sex is partially appealing to heavy metal and rock musicians who have incorporated the Ripper's murder into their works. There's been more than 100 books written about the case have been published, many of which offer conjectures to the true identity of the murder and circumstances surrounding the crime, including that the murders were part of an occult or Masonic plot and the police recovering for highly placed culprits, perhaps members of the royal family. We did speak on the prince.
Right.
The best known of these conspiracy theory works is Alan Moore and Eddie Campbell's award-winning graphic novel From Hell, which ran from 91 to 96, which was later adapted into the 2001 movie starring Johnny Depp, which was a fantastic movie.
It is
I did enjoy that one. I did like it.
It doesn't come across as a really serious expose on Jack the Ripper at all, though. But it's a great movie.
But yeah, it was really so. Many of these books, however, are based on fraudulent claims and documents. We may never know who the actual Jack the Ripper was, but rest assured, we will never forget the terror this killer brought to the streets of Whitechapel those many years ago.
Oh, yeah.
And like Raven said, having schizophrenia does not make you violent.
No, it
No.
doesn't. It just that's it. I don't think the capacity was there for the. I mean, from all the reports. I mean, their own reports on this guy say that he wasn't capable of doing it. So I don't know.
I am going to make an actual video on Jack. I'm gonna that will come out. It'll give everything we've talked about here,
Mhm.
pretty much. Excuse me. I may look into the female part of it to add into the story, because that is something I want to look up, because you guys did bring up some interesting points there on Jack. I can understand where you're coming from, Jen and Raven and Megan, where you guys are coming from on that. I still don't see it, but it is worth looking into, and I promise I will look into that further.
I don't think it's a problem that I think the fact that it can't be seen is more a statement of how we still are as a society. I mean, there is this strong aspect that women won't be serial killers and women don't do the violence and women, but that's not true, and we know it's not true. But there's this thing in the background that the men are the ones that we always have to fear, and that's just not true. The people you have to fear are often the people who are closest to you. For most people, the people who are going to hurt you the most are the people who are close. Well, it's true though. The people. I mean, 90% of murders are done by people that know the person, know the victim.
This is true, because you got to get close to do it.
That's the truth, because most murders are a thing of passion. Serial killers are different. It's not about passion. It's the same as if you got. To be a serial killer is, well, there might be a passion for killing, but it's not a passion towards the person they're killing. They're very detached from the person they're killing.
Although Catherine Knight, those were pretty passionate, angry killings.
That's true, and it was attached to people that she knew as well.
She skinned that guy and then made him into soup just because, she got pissed off, and she just had some anger issues there. But So I don't know why I keep going back to Catherine Knight. She's upset
because it's terrifying.
Because we just covered
but
it.
I think it's also but I also think it's a shocking thing, because most of us think, violent crime, man. But that's not true. Violent crime can be done by a man or a woman. Possibly possibly you could say, given strength differences and size differences, it's easier for men to do violent crime.
But she was a strong woman.
The inclination for there to be violent crime is the same regardless of whether you're a man or a woman. There's just as much potential from the psychosis of it for either, but the physical capability of being able to do it is more prevalent for a man.
Pickle says, "Leave Catherine alone. She was hangry."
Yeah, she needed a Snickers.
All I can hear is leave Brittany alone there. Leave Catherine alone.
Yeah, give her a Snickers. Cure that hangry. Oh my god.
Always creative. Says, I think people don't want to think a woman could be capable of doing something that horrific.
Oh, I think they're capable, because they are absolutely capable. I just don't feel it.
This is something, as me being somebody who's in the trans community knows all too well, because TERFs often have this mentality that women can't do violent crimes. So it's trans women are scary because they think of trans women as men, so trans women are dangerous and think because they're men. And that's that whole mentality of people don't want to think that women can do violent crime, but it's not true. The rates of conviction are different between men and women, but the rates of crime are very similar, and that's mostly because in a lot of cases they don't look to see if there's a woman who did it, or in the past there hasn't been. Nowadays, if you look at the more recent things, you can see that there's more things. That it is true that there's generally more crimes of passion when it comes to women than it is men. And there tends to be less premeditation for women than there is for men, but that's not always the case either. So, it's a furphy. Women can be just as violent and just as vindictive and just as dreadful as any man can be. Men just who get across over that limit tend to find it easier to be that violent, usually due to a size or strength advantage, more so than than anything else. Because if you're a small woman and you want to go out and kill somebody, it's going to be a lot harder for you.
Well, not necessarily. You could be like the soap lady.
Use a gun,
or poison.
Like soup lady, yeah. I love that soup lady.
No, the soup lady, and we got the soap lady, and
the soup lady, the soap lady.
We got we've been doing a lot of female killers lately. That's pretty. Oh my god! But I have to admit the possibility is there. Although when I look at the whole thing, like I'm looking at all of it, it doesn't fit for me. I mean, it doesn't have anything to do like man versus woman. It has to do with the feel of the whole case, and it just the letter.
I totally see where you're coming from, Claire. My point is, you can't.
There's just not enough there. No, we can't. We can't. And I agree because there's just not enough evidence here, one way or the other, anyway, about this case, and that's why it's still open. And why we're still talking about it today. There's just not enough
victims. We talk about Jack the Ripper as a serial killer, and Jack the Ripper was, but in comparison to some more modern known serial killers, what is it, 5 killings is quite small.
It is small, and it was in a short period of time. Yeah,
and that's one of the things. They're known as ripperologists, those that actually study the case and make it basically their life's work and whatnot. Is one of the things they think is Jack died shortly after the fifth victim, because to just stop it is extremely and almost impossible for a serial killer
not
to
necessarily.
do.
Yeah, but that last case was so complete, Jay, that if you were going to stop and that was your thing, that would have been it. Like that actually. That actually looked like the finish. Like, okay, I've accomplished what I need to. Do here.
I mean, if you're talking about it, let's go back to the concept that maybe this was a medical student learning how to do it. And let's go with Claire and say it was a guy, because that's more likely if it was a medical student rather than a woman who didn't get her place or whatever it was. At this point, you're dealing with a sociopath. And a sociopath is not necessarily a killer, but a sociopath does not feel the emotions of what they're doing. So at this point, this person wants to be a doctor. They still have personal needs and wants, and wants access to these bodies, maybe didn't get anyway, sees this opportunity. Hey, prostitutes, nobody cares about them. I kill a prostitute, I can cut them apart, I can do the bits that pull them apart, do the stuff that I need to do for my medical things. So because this is no different to fucking rich people buying corpses, which they did do. And they didn't know where they came from. So sometimes they were killed by people and given to them doctors. You know, there was murders around all this thing all the time. So this person is a sociopath. And because they're a sociopath, they don't see any problem with killing a prostitute. And they eventually got themselves to the point where they found somebody who they could get 2 hours where they could do the whole thing without being disturbed, cut them apart, did what all they needed. And that was it. They were done. They didn't need to do it again. They'd done all the anatomy stuff they needed to do and walked away from it.
I do want to say, clarify something when I said serial killers don't stop. There are cases of serial killers stopping. Shay did say BTK stopped. Ed Kemper stopped. So yes, there are some serial killers that will stop. I just find it and I get where you're coming from, Jen, but in this aspect, for me, I don't see how someone that was that prevalent and did what they did would just stop. Unless,
my theory on it was that they stopped that type, but because of their passion, like if you believe that first letter was actually from Jack, you could hear in there how much they love this and the game of it. So like maybe they just moved on to a different type. Like there's a theory that they left the country and they came over here and they're over here doing a different type of serial killing. There's some other.
Or if they got their qualification as a doctor, they just started killing their patients in such a way that they didn't get found out.
Yeah, exactly, or something like that. I think the progression of the need to do what they did there, that looked like completion to me in that last murder. Like it went from A to Z, everything you could possibly do to the body and learn was all done. And then, but that doesn't mean he stopped killing. He's either dead or he went and killed in another way in a new game because he's obviously in love with the game and the actual process.
But if you assume that the first letter was from Jack, then I'd agree with you.
It's a big if.
If you then assume that the letters were written by somebody else to prop up the newspaper, then you don't know what Jack's mindset is about this.
I do agree that every letter after that first letter was probably somebody else.
But the style of writing used in the first letter was the same as what was used on the postcard.
Yeah, probably.
So,
this is true.
No, well, they did writing analysis of it, so they think it was written by the same person.
Talking about stopping or changing or whatnot, Ed Kemper is a good example because Kemper stopped killing and turned himself in because he reached what he wanted to do was to kill his mother. But he also stated that if he hadn't turned himself in, he would probably keep going on killing.
He would have progressed into a different type of killer, and keep going.
But he had believed that he'd reached what he wanted, his goal.
It is actually that case that gives me my theory on Jack, that he could not have stopped killing. He just might have killed in a different way.
For
he or she.
Atheists, we know that Jack...
They didn't have sex.
While Sarah's concept, there might have... Well, some psychologists think there might have been something sexual in it. There's no real evidence for that, and that Jack did not have sex with the victims.
Yeah, and because most of the cases, let's be clear, like in most of the cases, there was no uterus or anything left to find any sperm anyway. Like, not possible. And it was, no.
Aside from that, they didn't really look for that back then either. So
it's right, and it was a prostitute, like we said before. It would
and
have
there
been,
also wasn't time in the first 4 victims. They were all done in public places, and they were found quickly because they were still
warm bodies.
There's just no way.
There's no way
they were sexual.
We're not saying they weren't gratificational, but we're just saying, maybe not evidence like that.
So,
because,
I want to wrap this up because like I said, Jack the Ripper, you can talk for hours,
and we did.
And we did almost 2 hours now.
We did 45 minutes of just arguing about whether it was a guy or a girl.
Yeah,
and it wasn't even an argument; it was an actual great discussion.
I don't know that there. I would fall on the thing that I am. I think there's a good 65% chance it was a man who did this, but you can't discount that 35-40% chance that it was.
And I have absolutely no evidence to think it is a man, except for just how the whole case presents to me. I guess I don't know. I think it's possible. It is clearly possible. There's no damn reason why it couldn't have been a woman.
They didn't look for DNA in the vagina for it too, atheists. They didn't look for DNA anywhere with Jack the Ripper.
In most cases, there wasn't even a vagina left. Like, I don't know what you do. You need to play the replay. You need to go look at the victim pictures. We're definitely not talking about the same thing here.
I want 2 things. I want you guys, if you guys want to continue to in your own time, not just you guys here on the panel, but those watching and listening later. If you want to dig more in-depth look at Jack the Ripper, I highly recommend jacktheripper.org. Everything you want to know about Jack the Ripper is there. Crime scene photos, actual pictures of the crime scenes.
With a warning.
Yes, the last one on, be careful, especially when you get to Mary Kelly. That black and white is...
And then there is... a podcast that I listen to. It's called Serial Killers from the Podcast Networks. They teamed up with Unsolved Murders, which is another podcast, and did, I believe it's a 4 or 5 part series on Jack the Ripper. That it is phenomenal to listen to, because you're getting both aspects from the serial killer and the unsolved at the same time. I highly recommend listening, and not to mention there are literally thousands of podcasts and YouTube videos and articles you can read on Jack. So if it's a rabbit hole you want to go down, I mean, there are websites dedicated to just who they believe Jack was. So you can go into looking into those. I do want to thank my guest tonight, Claire, as always.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining me in our true crime deep dives and whatnot. And Jen, thank you for showing up.
It was
no problem.
It was nice.
Yeah.
Jack the Ripper is always interesting, and it's such a controversial thing because there's so little evidence left now for a trail to be chased, and it's
all we can go by is whatever other people have deep dive in and looked
and
at.
there'll never be anything new for
Yeah.
this. It is what it is now, and that. Thank you for having me.
Krabby, the silliness will never be banned. Silliness is always appreciated. And also is Krabby says, I am a full yellow murder minion now. Thanks, panel. Thank you guys for being here. I want to thank my daughter Megan for showing up. Unfortunately, she did have to leave early because she has to get up really early for work, and then partway through her phone died on her. So we'll get her back on talking about something else, and we'll get things straightened out for her so she can join us more regularly. Because like I said, she loves true crime just like her dad. So to get her different perspective, anybody's perspective is awesome to see. As always, True Serial is open to anyone that wants to join at any time. So at any point, anybody in the chat wants to join us for a conversation, you're more than welcome. I love getting input from other people on cases.
He's number 5. He is really number 5.
Number 5?
Old movie reference there. Yeah, number 5.
Oh, Johnny 5?
Input. Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was number 42.
I haven't seen Short Circuit in years.
If you were ever gonna do an old movie tear apart, that would be a great movie to do.
Yeah. Raven's like, I have to get up early and I'm still here. Whoosh.
What?
Yeah, but she had to go home. There's a difference.
Yeah, she had to travel a little bit. She don't get to just go in the other room.
Well, her travel a little bit is literally 2 blocks away, but
oh well, that would have been important information. Okay, so all right. I'm with you then, Raven.
But she's not used to getting up that early to go to work. She just her schedule just switched to where she's now mornings. So it's still getting a little bit on her.
Yeah.
Krabby said that would require research on my part, and that sounds too much like work.
Like real work. Yeah, she said real work. I don't know.
I said thank you all. Make sure that before you leave, you hit that like button. If you haven't already subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you'll be notified when we bring on more stuff. Raven said we had 2 blocks tonight.
Yeah, 2 bots. Yep. It's down from, we've been getting them everywhere. They're in every single chat I go to. So, yeah.
I'm sorry. She meant 2 blocks. I believe she was talking about how far Megan lived from us.
Oh, okay. I thought she meant those bots.
It was still 2 blocks on the bots. So
2 blocks on the bots.
And thank you, 420. 420 says, thanks for putting in the work, guys. This was truly fascinating. Always. Monday over on Claire's channel, we're going to start our two-parter. We're going to start on Claire's on Monday and finish on mine finish here on Thursday, where we're going to talk about Ed Gein.
Ed Gein.
One of Claire's favorites, one of my least favorites.
I know. Well, we can't always go with your favorites, Jay.
Yeah,
you have quite a few.
Oh,
you have turned me on to quite a few of them.
Raven said there were 3 bots, not 2.
Oh, okay. So
I must have missed one there somewhere because I only
good catching, guys. Like good job, good mods, excellent mods.
So,
yep.
But yeah, we're gonna look at Ed Gein on Monday night. I think we're gonna go through the history of Ed on Monday, and then on Thursday we're gonna kind of look at
his psychological
makeup and his effect on other serial killers and literary works and media stuff. So
yes, Ed Gein is the original Psycho, in case anybody wants to know.
And the inspiration for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre also. So
yeah. So
Gein, G-I-E-N.
G-E-I-N or G-I-E-N?
I think it's E-I.
Yeah, I got E-I there. I think I typed it out for them. but
Yeah.
I could be wrong. Ed Gein, like Gein, I believe. Mm-hmm.
Yep, Ed Gein.
Mm.
So
Gein.
that'll be Monday and Thursday. So
Yep. Monday over on my channel. What do you say? Like you need time. You say it's like 7, 8.
I
I
believe
don't know.
it's. Let me just real quick double check my schedule because I think
Mhm.
7 is fine.
Okay.
Which is our normal time.
Yeah, 7. Let's just say 7 unless you tell
7
me
7 will be fine, and then 7 again on Thursday.
Yeah. I like this bouncing back and forth. This is fun.
Oh, by the way, in case anybody's all wondering, what really happened to Jack the Ripper is he ended up on the homeworld of the Vorlons.
He what? On the Vorlons?
On the
Really?
Vorlons,
Okay.
yeah.
Vorlon homeworld, yeah.
I was hoping we were going to find him in the Raelians, while we did this deep dive. But, because there is all that. You ever watch those other movies where they put Jack Ripper in the time travel stuff, like he's coming back and shit? Like, so I'm thinking, well, maybe they had a conversation with him. Maybe he's like up there with the aliens.
So over on Hereticals on Wednesday, we will be back with the Raelians. I believe this week, Chris is going to talk to us about aliens in the Bible.
Yep, we're going to learn about all those aliens in the Bible, which
and
I'm looking forward to that.
Krabby, tomorrow morning at bright and early 6 a.m. is
Six pack. Yay!
Yeah.
That still makes me. Thank you, Jen. That's the best thing that has happened to me all in 2021 was the day you brought me over there. And
I'm so glad.
Me over there. You know what? Because and then it just stuck. Like I've been there everyone since. Like I just can't leave it. It is like the best place, the best conversations, so much fun.
Tomorrow on Six Pack over on Reticles, our guest will be Digital Demonic Davros.
That's always.
In all honesty, we have to blame Chesh because it's Chesh's fault because she introduced me to you, and that's how this all started.
Well, that's it. There's
blame Chesh.
I don't blame her. I'll thank Chesh. I'm not going to blame Chesh.
We
right now, and I'm going to thank her.
If anybody hates the fact that the three of us are together on a stream.
That's insane. Yeah. Okay, I see that. Yeah, then it's definitely her fault. Yeah, so much fun.
Anyways,
I enjoy every second.
We're gonna end this. Thanks everybody for joining us on this talk. Like I said, Jack is a fascinating case study. We could have just went in deep, just hours.
There are so many rabbit holes with Jack the Ripper.
Well, we could have went deep down just the psychological stuff on each of his victims. There's that too, but there was so much. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Megan, for joining us again. Thank you, Jen, for stepping in and joining the Murder Minions this week. I want to thank all the Murder Minions in the chat, all you Murder Minions listening later. Thank you all for joining us, and until tomorrow for some of you that will join us, and the rest of you will see you on Monday. Thank you all for being here. Have a good night and take care of yourself, everyone.
Yes.
Bye.
Good night all.